Now that we understand what HTML is, let's move on to the fun stuff. I'm going to look at the content division element, or in other words, the div. I like to think of a div as a beautiful being that can be anything you want it to be. We can give a div a height, we can give it a width, and we can give it a background color using CSS, or in other words, styling, which we will cover in lectures coming up. We can also use it in a very basic form without styling to hold other elements together. So, for example, we can create a div and put a heading in it and put a paragraph in it, and now these two elements will be grouped together. Just be aware that there might be better elements to use when grouping these together. You might choose a section element, for example. This is because the section element has semantic meaning. Semantics are the meaning of words or phrases in a language. In HTML, which is a language, elements have their own semantic meaning too. So, this means if you use a section element, the browser will pick up its semantic meaning and understand to treat this as a section, on desktops, mobiles, you name it. We will dive into this topic further later on. For now, just know that the div does not have this. It's like a mysterious ghost. Let's see what else we can dive into this topic further later on. Ghost. Now, just know that the div does not have this. It's like a mysterious ghost. Let's see what else we can do to a div in the next lecture.
Distinct, distinct, distinct. Distinct, distinct.
That the div does not have this. It's like a mysterious ghost. Let's see what else we can do to a div, mobiles, you name it. We will dive into this topic further later on. For now, just know that the div does not have this. It's like a mysterious ghost. Let's see what else we can do to a div in the next lecture. Let's learn about IDs and classes and when you should use them. The ID attribute adds a unique identifier to an HTML element. In this example, here is an H1 element with an ID of title. You can reference the ID name of the title within your JavaScript or CSS. Here's a CSS example referencing the ID of title to change the text color to red. The hash symbol in front of the title tells the computer you want to target an ID with that value. ID names should not be repeated more than once, and they should always be unique. Another thing to note about ID values is that they cannot have spaces in them. Here's an example of applying the word main and heading to an ID attribute value. Browsers will see the space as part of the ID, which will lead to unwanted issues when it comes to styling and scripting. ID attribute values should only contain letters, digits, underscores, and dashes. In contrast to the ID attribute, the class attribute value does not need to be unique and can contain spaces. Here's an example of applying a class called box to a div element. If you wanted to add multiple class names to an element, you can do so by separating the names by a space. Here's an updated example applying multiple classes to a div element. To apply a set of styles to that box class, you can reference that class inside your CSS. Here's an example of setting width, height, and border properties to the element with the class name of box. The dot symbol in front of the word box tells the computer you want to target a class with that value. When the code runs, it will search through all of your HTML document to find all the elements with that class name and apply those styles. So, to recap, when should you use an ID versus a class? Classes are best used when you want to apply a set of styles to many elements. If you want to target a specific element, it is best to use an ID because those values need to be unique. Values need to Let's learn about HTML entities. An HTML entity or character reference is a set of characters used to represent a reserved character in HTML. In this example, there is a paragraph element with an image element nested inside. The text on the screen should say, "This is an image element," where the word image is replaced with the syntax for an image element. However, the text currently says, "This is an element." This is happening because when the HTML parser sees the less than symbol followed by an HTML tag name, it interprets that as an HTML element. To fix this issue, you could use HTML entities. Here is an updated example using the correct HTML entities for the less than and greater than symbols. These types of character references are known as named character references. Named character references start with an ampersand sign and end with a semicolon. By using a named character reference, the HTML parser will not confuse this with an actual HTML element. Here is what the updated paragraph element looks like on the page. Now users will be able to see the entire image element syntax as you intended it. Another type of character reference would be the decimal numeric reference. Here's an example of using the decimal numeric reference for the less than symbol. This character reference starts with an ampersand sign and hash symbol followed by 1 or decimal digits followed by a semicolon. The last type of character reference would be the hexadecimal numeric reference. Here is an example of using the hexadecimal numeric reference for the less than symbol. This character reference starts with an ampersand sign, hash symbol, and the letter X. Then it is followed by 1 or more ASCII hex digits and ends with a semicolon. So, what are some other examples of using HTML entities? Well, you often see them used for symbols like the copyright symbol, quotes, trademark symbols, and the ampersand sign. Let's learn about the link element and how to use it to link to external style sheets. The link element is used to link external resources like style sheets and site icons. Here is the basic syntax for using the link element for an external CSS file. The rel attribute is used to specify the relationship between the linked resource and the HTML document. In this situation, we need to specify that this linked resource is the style sheet. It is considered best practice to separate your HTML and CSS in different files. Developers will use the link element for their external CSS file instead of writing everything in their HTML document. The href attribute is used to specify the location of the URL for the external resource. The dot followed by a / in the example tells the computer to look in the current folder or directory for the styles.css file. The link element should be placed inside the head element as seen in the following example. Oftentimes, you will see multiple link elements inside a professional code base that link to different style sheets, fonts, and even icons. Here is an example of using the link element to link to an external Google font called Playwright Cuba. Google fonts are a set of free and open source custom fonts that you can use inside any project. You can choose which fonts you would like to use, and Google will provide you with the necessary HTML and CSS code. In this example, the pre-connect value for the rel attribute tells the browser to create an early connection to the value specified in the href attribute. This is done to speed up loading times for these external resources. Another common use case for the link element is to link to icons. Here is an example of linking to a favicon. A favicon, which is short for favorite icon, is a small icon typically displayed in the browser tab next to the site title. A lot of websites will use a favicon to display their brand icon. Let's learn about the script element and how to use it to link to external JavaScript files. The script element is used to embed executable code. Most developers will use this to execute JavaScript code. JavaScript is used to add interactivity to your web pages. Common examples of using JavaScript include interactive games, image sliders, and dynamic forms that validate user input in real time. Here is an example of using the script element in an HTML document. In this example, we have an alert to display the message "Welcome to FreeCodeCamp." Here is a screenshot of how this example works in the browser. When the page first loads, the alert will pop up. Then the user can click on the OK button to dismiss the message. While you can technically write all of your JavaScript code inside the script tags, it is considered best practice to link to an external JavaScript file instead. Here is an example of using the script element to link to an external JavaScript file. The source attribute is used here to specify the location for that JavaScript file. SRC stands for source. The reason why it is not encouraged to place all of your JavaScript inside the HTML document is because of separation of concerns. Separation of concerns is a design principle where you separate your programs into distinct sections and have each section address a separate concern. In this case, we want to separate our JavaScript code from our HTML code. Let's learn about the HTML boilerplate. What is the HTML boilerplate, you ask? It's like a ready-made template for your web pages. Think of it as the foundations of a house. A boilerplate includes the basic structure and essential elements every HTML document needs. It saves you time and helps ensure your pages are set up properly. Let's break down the key parts of an HTML boilerplate. First, there is the doc type declaration. It tells the browser which version of HTML you're using. Next comes the HTML tag. This wraps around all of your content and can specify the language of your page. Inside the HTML tag, you'll find two main sections using. Next comes the doc type declaration. It tells the browser which version of HTML you're using. Next comes the HTML tag. This wraps around all of your content and can specify the language of your page. Inside the HTML tag, you'll find two main sections, a head and a body. The head section contains important behind-the-scenes information. Your site's metadata, contained in meta elements, has details about things like character encoding and how websites like Twitter should preview your page's link. Your site title, found in the title element, determines the text that appears in the browser tab or window. Finally, you'll typically link your page's style sheet and script files in the head section using link elements. The body section is where all your content goes. This is what visitors actually see on your web page. Now, why is boilerplate important? It ensures your pages are structured correctly and work well across different browsers. Using a boilerplate helps you avoid common mistakes and follow best practices. It's a great starting point for any web project. Remember, you can customize your own boilerplate to fit your needs. As you gain experience, you might add your own preferred elements or meta tags. As you continue to improve your personal boilerplate, you'll find that it saves you time when starting new projects. Next time you start a new HTML file, consider using a boilerplate. It will definitely give you a solid foundation to build on. What is UTF-8 character encoding and why is it needed? UTF-8 or UCS transformation format 8 is a standardized character encoding widely used on the web. Character encoding is the method computers use to store characters as data. Essentially, all text on a web page is a sequence of characters stored as one or more bytes. In computing, a byte is a unit of data consisting of 8 bits or binary digits. UTF-8 supports every character in the Unicode character set, and this includes characters and symbols from all writing systems, languages, and technical symbols too. By setting the character encoding to UTF-8, it will ensure that the accident E character is displayed correctly on the page. For each new project you create, you should include this meta element with a charset attribute set to UTF-8. What is UTF-8 character encoding and why is it needed? UTF-8 or UCS transformation format 8 is a standardized character encoding widely used on the web. Character encoding is the method computers use to store characters as data. Essentially, all text on a web page is a sequence of characters stored as one or more bytes. In computing, a byte is a unit of data consisting of 8 bits or binary digits. UTF-8 supports every character in the Unicode character set, and this includes characters and symbols from all writing systems, languages, and technical symbols too. By setting the character encoding to UTF-8, it will ensure that the accident E character is displayed correctly on the page. For each new project you create, you should include this meta element with a charset attribute set to UTF-8. What is the role of the meta description element and how does it affect SEO? SEO, or search engine optimization, is a practice that optimizes web pages so they become more visible and rank higher on search engines. One way to improve your site's SEO is to provide a short description for the web page using the meta element. Here is an example of using the meta element to set a page description for a gardening site. By setting the name attribute to description, it ensures that browsers, search engines, and other web tools correctly interpret this metadata. The content attribute is where you will place your description. It is recommended that you keep your description short and concise. This is because search engines will often truncate the description based on the results page layout. Similar to other types of meta elements, the meta description will not be visible on the web page itself. One place where the page description can be found is in the search engine results page snippet. Here are some examples of page results snippets for FreeCodeCamp subreddit and GitHub repositories. In this example, each of the page descriptions are located just beneath the site links. Within a couple of seconds, users can get a general sense of what the page is about and decide to click on the links for more information. Even though meta descriptions won't directly affect a site's ranking on a search engine, having a strong description could result in more traffic to your site. Let's learn about what is the role of the Open Graph tags and how does it affect SEO? The Open Graph protocol enables you to control how your website content appears across various social media platforms such as Facebook, LinkedIn, and many more. Here is an example of a LinkedIn card posted for FreeCodeCamp. By setting these Open Graph properties, you can entice users to want to click and engage with your content. You can set these properties through a collection of meta elements inside your HTML head section. The first important OG property to include would be the title. Here is an example of setting the OG title for the FreeCodeCamp homepage. For the name attribute, you will need to specify that this is an OG colon title. The content attribute is where you will write the title you want displayed for social media sites. The next important OG property would be the type. Here is an example of using the OG type for the FreeCodeCamp homepage. The type property is used to represent the type of content being shared on social media. Examples of this content include articles, websites, videos, or music. The third important OG property would be the image. Here is an example of sending the OG image for the free CoCamp homepage. In this example, the Open Graph image is pointing to the free CoCamp logo. All of these images should be high quality with good dimensions and ratios. Most social media platforms will include criteria for image requirements to help you ensure that your content displays well on their site. For example, the developers.facebook.com documentation page states, use images that are at least 1200 by 630 pixels for the best display on high-resolution devices. At the minimum, you should use images that are 600 by 350 pixels to display link page posts with larger images. The fourth important OG property would be the URL. Here is an example of setting the OG URL for the free CoCamp homepage. There are many more OG properties that you can set, like the description, audio, video, and locale. However, the Open Graph URL, image, type, and title are the most important ones to include. So, how do these Open Graph properties affect search engine optimization? When your content is shared on social media, well-crafted OG properties can enhance the appearance for your content in users' feeds. This can lead to higher click-through rates, which could signal to search engines that your content is relevant and engaging.
What are replaced elements, and what are some examples? A replaced element is an element whose content is determined by an external resource rather than by CSS itself. CSS, or cascading style sheets, is used to add styles to a web page. Common examples of replaced elements include the image, iframe, and video elements. With replaced elements, you can control the position or layout of an element, but your CSS cannot directly modify the content of that element. This might be easier to explain with some examples. Consider the image element, which embeds an image on your web page. The element itself is replaced with the external object, the image. Your CSS can control things like the positioning of the image or apply a filter to it, but you cannot actually modify the image itself. A more robust example might be the iframe element, which embeds an external site on your web page. Common examples for using the iframe element would be to embed maps or YouTube videos onto the page. The element itself is replaced with the external object, the site. Your CSS can change the positioning of the embedded site, but you cannot modify the site's contents. To dive a bit further, if the embedded site has an H1 element, your CSS would not be able to style that H1 element. You cannot change the size, font color, and so on. There are some other replaced elements, such as video and embed. And some elements behave as replaced elements under specific circumstances. Here's an example of an input element with the type attribute set to image. This type of input is considered to be a replaced element, but other input types like text or email are not replaced elements. What are common ways to optimize media assets? There are 3 tools to consider when using media, such as images, on your web pages: the size, the format, and the compression. Let's talk about the size of your images first. When you are building a website, you'll often style images to display in a specific size. For example, you might have an image display at a 640 by 480 resolution. 640 represents the width, while 480 represents the height in pixels. When preparing your image, you want to scale it to a 640 by 480 size to match that styling. If you serve an image that is 1920 by 1080, but are styling it to be much smaller, you're requiring your users to download unnecessary data. A smaller resolution results in a smaller file size. The next thing to consider is your file format. 2 of the most common file formats are PNG and JPEG, but these are no longer the most ideal formats for serving images. Unless you need support for older browsers, you should consider using a more optimized format like WebP or AVIF. Finally, you can run compression algorithms on your images. A compression algorithm is used to reduce the size for files or data. There are options like PNG Crush to compress your images locally, or you can use online compression tools. However, it's worth noting that specific file formats, such as JPEG, are not lossless. Lossless means that the original data can be perfectly reconstructed from the compressed data. If you try to compress a JPEG image, it will result in a degraded quality. You should keep all these things in mind when selecting images for your web pages. What are common ways of noting that specific file formats, such as JPEG, are not lossless? Lossless means that the original data can be perfectly reconstructed from the compressed data. If you try to compress a JPEG image, it will result in a degraded quality. You should keep all these things in mind when selecting images for your web pages. Most ideal formats for serving images. Unless you need support for older browsers, you should consider using a more optimized format like WebP or AVIF. Finally, you can run compression algorithms on your images. A compression algorithm is used to reduce the size for files or data. There are options like PNG Crush to compress your images locally, or you can use online compression tool. However, it's worth noting that specific file formats, such as JPEG, are not lossless. Lossless means that the original data can be perfectly reconstructed from the compressed data. If you try to compress a JPEG image, it will result in a degraded quality. You should keep all these things in mind when selecting images for your web pages. What are different types of image licenses and how do they work? Images are considered intellectual property. This means that they are protected by copyright regulations, most often belonging to the creator. By default, images are released as all rights reserved. The creator, or publisher sometimes, holds all copyright for the image. This means that you cannot use them in your web page unless you do one of three things: obtain written permission from the copyright holder, purchase a license from the copyright holder, or incorporate the image in a way that falls under fair use. That third point is a bit tricky. Fair use requires that your use of the image is both limited and transformative. Some examples of fair use would be to comment on or review the art, or create a parody of the image. Some images might be released under a permissive license, like a Creative Commons license, or the BSD license that FreeCodeCamp uses. These images are available for use in your website, but you'll need to read the license to understand the rules you need to follow when using these images. For example, you might be required to make your website open source, or you may not be permitted to modify the image in any way. Finally, some images may be released to the public domain. An image under the public domain has no copyright attached to it and is free to be used without any restrictions. Images licensed specifically under the Creative Commons 0 license are considered public domain. Most search engines will allow you to filter image results by license. There are also sites like Pixabay and Unsplash, which offer free-to-use images. Always be mindful of the copyright and licensing when you use an image in your website. What are different types of image licenses and how do they work? Images are considered intellectual property. This means that they are protected by copyright regulations, most often belonging to the creator. By default, images are released as all rights reserved. The creator, or publisher sometimes, holds all copyright for the image. This means that you cannot use them in your web page unless you do one of three things: obtain written permission from the copyright holder, purchase a license from the copyright holder, or incorporate the image in a way that falls under fair use. That third point is a bit tricky. Fair use requires that your use of the image is both limited and transformative. Some examples of fair use would be to comment on or review the art, or create a parody of the image. Some images might be released under a permissive license, like a Creative Commons license, or the BSD license that FreeCodeCamp uses. These images are available for use in your website, but you'll need to read the license to understand the rules you need to follow when using these images. For example, you might be required to make your website open source, or you may not be permitted to modify the image in any way. Finally, some images may be released to the public domain. An image under the public domain has no copyright attached to it and is free to be used without any restrictions. Images licensed specifically under the Creative Commons 0 license are considered public domain. Most search engines will allow you to filter image results by license. There are also sites like Pixabay and Unsplash, which offer free-to-use images. Always be mindful of the copyright and licensing when you use an image in your website. So what are SVGs and when should you use them? First, you need to understand how images work. Common image formats like PNG and JPEG are classified as raster formats. This essentially means that they are pixel-based, with the data tracking the color value in each pixel. A large downside of raster-based images is that they do not upscale well. If you've ever tried to make a PNG larger, you may have seen that it becomes pixelated or blurry. An SVG is a different kind of image. SVG stands for Scalable Vector Graphic. A vector graphic tracks data based on paths and equations to plot points, lines, and curves. What this really means is that a vector graphic, like an SVG, can be scaled to any size without impacting the quality. SVGs specifically have the added benefit of storing data impacting the quality. Graphic like an SVG, can be scaled to any size without impacting the quality. SVGs specifically have the added benefit of storing data in XML. This means you can use them directly in your code as raw HTML with the SVG element. It also means you can programmatically change the color of the image. So when would you want to use an SVG? A great use case is for icons. If you want to create custom bullet points or add icons to your links to represent social media platforms, using SVGs is the best approach. One of the most popular icon libraries, Font Awesome, uses SVG images for their icons. SVGs are also great for web page logos. Because they scale perfectly, they allow you to adapt your layout to any responsive design you need. Next time you have an SVG locally, try opening it with a text editor and playing with the code. What's the role of the HTML audio and video element, and how do they work? The audio and video elements allow you to add sound and video content to your HTML documents. The audio element supports popular audio formats like MP3, WAV, and OGG. The video format supports MP4, OGG, and WebM formats. To include audio content on your web page, you can use the audio element with the SRC attribute pointing to the location of your audio file. If you try to run this example, you'll see that nothing shows up on the page. However, if you inspect the page with the developer tools, you'll see the audio element is indeed on the page. If you want to see the audio player on the page, then you can add the audio element with the controls attribute. The controls attribute enables users to manage audio playback, including adjusting volume and pausing or resuming playback. The controls attribute is a Boolean attribute that can be added to an element to enable built-in playback controls. If omitted, no controls will be shown. This is what the example looks like rendered on the web page. Apart from the source and control attributes, there are several other attributes that enhance the functionality of the audio element. The loop attribute is a Boolean attribute that makes the audio replay continuously. Here's an example of using the loop attribute to play one of Quincy Larson's songs titled Can't Stay Down. When the song reaches the end, it will loop back around and play it again from the beginning. Another attribute you can use is the muted attribute. When present in the audio element, this Boolean attribute will start the audio in a muted state. Here's an example of using the muted attribute. When you start the song in the browser, you'll not hear anything. To hear the music, you would need to click on the volume icon like this. When it comes to audio file types, there are differences in which browsers support which type. To accommodate this, you can use source elements inside the audio element, and the browser will select the first source that it understands. Here's an example of using multiple source elements for an audio element. The browser will first start with the OGG type, and if it can't play the audio, then it will move down to the next type in the list. All the attributes we have learned so far are also supported in the video element. Here's an example of using video element with the loop, controls, and muted attributes. For the SRC or source attribute, we are using a video called Big Buck Bunny from archive.org. If you wanted to display an image while the video is downloading, you can use the poster attribute. This attribute is not available for audio elements and is unique to the video element. Here's an example of Buck Bunny from archive.org. If you wanted to display an image while the video is downloading, you can use the poster attribute. This attribute is not available for audio elements and is unique to the video element. Here's an example of using the poster attribute with content provided by peach.blender.org. This example is also using the width attribute to set the width to 620 pixels so the video fits better on the screen. Here's what the example looks like rendered on the page. Attribute. This attribute is not available for audio elements and is unique to the video element. Here's an example of using the poster attribute with content provided by peach.blender.org. This example is also using the width attribute to set the width to 620 pixels so the video fits better. The loop, controls, and muted attributes. For the SRC or source attribute, we are using a video called Big Buck Bunny. If you wanted to display an image while the video is downloading, you can use the poster attribute. This attribute is not available for audio elements and is unique to the video element. Here's an example of using the poster attribute with content. How do you embed videos onto your page using the iframe element? First, what exactly is the iframe element? Iframe stands for inline frame. It's an inline element used to embed other HTML content directly within the HTML page. That HTML content could be a video, map, another HTML element, or even other web pages. Here's what the syntax of the iframe element looks like. The src attribute specifies the URL of the page you want to embed. The width attribute specifies the width of the iframe. The height attribute specifies the height of the iframe. The allow full screen attribute allows the user to display the iframe in full screen mode. It's also good practice to specify a title attribute for the iframe, as it's important for accessibility. To embed a video within an iframe, you can copy it directly from popular video services like YouTube and Vimeo, or define it yourself with the src attribute, pointing to the URL of the video. Here's an example of embedding a popular free code camp course from YouTube. And here's the result in the browser. You can then customize the iframe to your needs, or even define your own by copying the link to the YouTube video and pasting it in as the URL value. The caveat is that you must replace https://youtube.be with https://youtube.com/embed. youtube.be is the domain when you copy the share link, and the youtube.com/embed is the domain required for embedding videos with the iframe element. Here's an example of that. Note that the video can come from anywhere. It doesn't have to come from video services like YouTube and Vimeo. Here's a video from Pixabay embedded with the iframe element. It renders perfectly. Don't forget, you can also embed a map, another web page, or direct HTML within the iframe element. Here's a map I was able to embed with the iframe element. If you want to embed direct HTML within the iframe element, you have to use the src doc attribute instead of src. URL of the video.
Hello, everyone here. are the different target attribute types and how do they work? You may have seen the target attribute on anchor elements or links. This important attribute tells the browser where to open the URL for the anchor element. There are 4 important possible values for this attribute. Note that each value is preceded by an underscore. The first value is self, which is the default value. This opens the link in the current browsing context. In most cases, this will be the current tab or window. The second value is blank, which opens the link in a new browsing context. Typically, this will open in a new tab, but some users might configure their browsers to open in a new window instead. The third value is parent, which opens a link in the parent of the current context. For example, if your website has an iframe, a parent target in that iframe would open in your website's tab or window, not in the embedded frame. The fourth value is top, which opens a link in the topmost browsing context. Think the parent of the parent. This is similar to parent, but the link will always open in the full browser tab window, even for nested embedded frames. There is a fifth value called unfenced top, which is currently used for the experimental fence frame API. At the time of this video, you probably won't have a reason to use this one yet, but by selecting the right target value to control where your users end up is an important consideration when creating a website. What is the difference between absolute and relative paths? A path is a string that specifies the location of a file or directory in a file system. In web development, paths let developers link to resources like images, style sheets, scripts, and other web pages. There are absolute and relative paths. Both are essential when specifying file locations within a file system. Let's look at the two so you can decide which one of them to use and when. An absolute path is a complete link to a resource. It starts from the root directory, includes every other directory, and finally the file name and extension. The root directory refers to the top-level directory or folder in a hierarchy. An absolute path also includes the protocol, which could be HTTP, HTTPS, and file, and the domain name if the resource is on the web. Here is an example of an absolute path that links to the FreeCodeCamp logo. In this example, the protocol is HTTPS. The domain name is designstyleguide.freecodecamp.org, and the file name is fcc_secondary_small.svg. Now, what if the resource you want to link to using an absolute path is on your local machine? Imagine I have the following folder structure on my machine. Here's how to link to the about.html file with an absolute path. It looks like this because we are going into a folder on my computer called users, then into a folder called user, then into a folder called desktop, then into a folder called FCC, then into a folder called script code, and then we are in this project, which in itself is a folder called absolute versus relative paths, then into the folder called pages to finally get the about.html file. Phew! Here's what the absolute URL looks like in a browser address bar. The URL includes the protocol, so file : //. It also includes the path, which looks like this and represents the series of folders that lead to the file. And finally, it also includes the about.html, which is the file name and the extension. Now let's look at the relative path. A relative path specifies the location of a file relative to the directory of the current file. It does not include the protocol or the domain name, making it shorter and more flexible for internal links within the same website. Let's go back to the same file structure. Here is an example of linking to the about.html page from the contact HTML page. So imagine you're on the contact HTML page, and because the about.html page is in the same place, we simply get the file name. This is an example of using a relative file path. So, which should you use and when? An absolute path or a relative path? Here are the rules you should